All right, everybody. We are back again for another episode of the Coach's Compass. It is season number 2. Don't know what episode it is because we just continue to roll, continue to bring on cool guests from all across the world. Right? It's your boy, Coach Coop. And we finally got our boy, Coach Jay, back with us again. It's been a minute since we've seen the boy. All right. But thank you guys as always. Remember, hit that like, subscribe, comment button down below so we continue to have this thing grow. Now, we have a familiar face back with us today. We've got our lady, Dorthe. She is here with us again for episode number 2. No intro needed because what she's doing is amazing work. Now, Dorthe, how are you and how has everything been since episode 1?
Thank you for having me once again. I'm super excited that you wanted to have me on as well, because obviously, like you probably sensed last time, we could go on for hours. And who knows, it's going to be a number 3 as well. So thank you. I'm busy, as always, with tons of different sports, not just football, but I think I'm kind of covering everything within that American football part, football as well, soccer world, tennis and coaches. I've been doing a lot with more coaches, even in the US and obviously also in Denmark. So that has been an interesting path as well for me, because at the end of the day, I always, when I work on it with my individual athletes, I get the insight. I get all the secrets that the coaches don't get. Providing these, like a little bit of what is it actually your athlete needs to be performing at its best. I actually like that middle role as well in that. And also, I have been writing on a book, which I imagine you want to hear much more about.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So actually, the one that I'm sharing, which I have been sharing with you guys, is the part 1. I'm actually releasing them in parts, in sections, because it's a little bit of a funny journey, because the way I wanted to write that book was not because I want to be a well-known author, because that's not my mission in life. But the reason why I felt I needed to do that was because it's an area I've been working on for 10 years with helping maximize performance with my athletes. And if you want to hear the story of obviously why I'm going to share that with you now, is because since 13, I actually dived into functional sports nutrition, which was added on to my nutrition part, my traditional sports nutrition. And then I came across this genetic performance thing. So that means that you actually have a genetic analysis of the individual. And for me, that was like a penny dropped, because I was working with athletes already by then. But there was something about, sometimes it was a little bit hard to find the right recipe. And a lot of athletes that borrow whatever works from somebody else. And sometimes they came to me and like, I did this nutrition plan that this guy that is already professional, he did, it doesn't work for me. I was like, well, why? How come is that? It's brilliant put together, and it could be the training plan, it could be anything, but they didn't really get the same level of success as the other guy or girl had. So when I was introduced to the genetics, I was like, now I got it. I was like, a penny really dropped for me. Like, of course, we are super individually put together just by genetics. So of course, whatever works for one doesn't work for the other. But most people might say, yeah, but we know that. Yeah, but nevertheless, why don't you then look at it? So since then, since 13, I've actually added that in whenever I work with my individual athletes in whatever sport they're at. It doesn't matter if they're triathlete, cyclist, or boxer, or fighter, or whatever. It's still the same process. It's about understanding the foundation you're standing on. And from there, you can work with whatever in terms of the training protocol, or we can customize your nutrition protocol. We can make sure that you move around any obstacles you might have already at disposition for genetically. But that has just been my process, working with this. And I think I told you last time, which I don't remember, so I'm just going to rephrase on that again. So when I've been working a lot with all the nutrition part, all the physical part in nutrition and recovery and all these things from a physical perspective, I had my really bad burnout in 2008. And that was also my next awakening, because, oh my God, I don't understand this, because I got everything right in terms of nutrition, in terms of my exercise and all that. How come I had a burnout now? So that was my new way of actually looking into, but how is it actually that things are connected? How is it actually that the mind is connected to the body? So obviously having the understanding of the genetics, and also diving very deep into biochemistry and adding on that neurochemistry, because at the end of the day, everything floats around from the head to the body. It's not like we can isolate things. So for me, that was my next step into the whole psychological part, the mental training, the mental performance part of it, understanding the brain and all that. So over the years, I just put this together to understand the whole human being, because from my experience, and it's not just a belief or it's a guess, it's based completely on science. As long as I have the data on the individual, I can customize exactly what works for the individual, which means I don't have to guess anything. I don't have to say, let's try with this and then see how it works, and then we're going to evaluate. So I put all these things together from that. But in 2021, when I was in dialogue with one of the biggest NFL teams, and they were supposed to get what I had. So I put my team together, and they were super interested, obviously, in the way I looked at the performance. But in order for me to get into a team, which I hadn't had before then, because to be honest, I actually expected that all rich, very wealthy and successful teams, they will already be doing this. It wasn't like, I had invented something from the rainforest or something. So I just expected that, soccer teams, NFL teams, all these rich clubs, they must be doing this. So I was super surprised, because obviously I spent 4 months researching into American football, which was kind of like my entrance to the American football. Was like, am I going to work with American football players? That's a new area. So I better read into what is the people behind it? What is the culture? What are they struggling with? Where do I see a gap that they are already missing in this? And normally I always said to my clients on one-on-one, I said, let's look for that marginal gain, that 1% that everybody always look at and super obsessed about. And the more I looked into that American football, which again, like when I looked at what they did, or maybe rather what they didn't do, the percentage actually added up. I came from, okay, now we're not even adding on 1% improvement. I'm not even, afraid to tell you that I can probably help you improve or increase performance for the individual 10 to 20% from where you're standing right now. And obviously that's pretty hard to grasp for most people, because that's a lot. But of course, when I saw all these gaps missing, I thought, okay, let's look at how does that team sport look in general in the world? Because obviously Denmark is pretty limited in at the end of the day. So I actually spent the last 2 years researching as much as I could dig up, with contacts from coaches, from owners, from players, from ex-players, anybody I could actually dig information from. Are you doing anything in terms of looking to your genetic profiling? And obviously that's not the only testing I'm normally doing, but combining that with the neurochemical part of it, which means the mental part of your genetic composition, your mental blueprint. And most people just look at me like I'm completely from another planet. Wait, what are you talking about? So the only team so far that I have discovered are doing this is FC Barcelona. That's the only team. I think there's few other teams that are looking into it, but I hope that soon we'll discover another team that has done it. But as far as I have been able to dig up information about it, I couldn't find any team that was doing this. So
you mean the soccer team or the American football team?
Both.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So we talked to somebody else as well in South America. They were doing a little test 5 years ago, maybe more, with a rugby team. And so we talked to the professor, part of that as well. So we've been really around interviewing so many people, and also trying to see, okay, let's just put all the information together that we can even find available for normal people. I won't say that there's something that I probably will have missed, but we looked into all the material have been written about genetics in terms of athletic performance. And it's not even new. That's the most weird thing about it. It's not like it's only 2 years old. The information has been there for a lot of years. Let's say maybe at least 10 years. Some of the genes that have been researched on for 100 years. So it's not even something we just discovered. We have had the information. So that's why I actually decided to write this book, put all the information. So it's not just something I'm saying or believing or guessing. This is actually what is out there. This is all the information you would need to know or look into. The best professors, the best medical doctors, the best universities and hospitals or whatever that have done all this research. And obviously I'm not a researcher. I mean, I'm not a scientist, so I haven't done the research, but I have collected all the information. So that's why I wrote the book. put all these, as many people as I can find out there, all the biggest experts, all the smartest, most intelligent people on genetics, I put all that material together. And then, because like obviously sharing that to people within performance, within athletic performance, how can they actually add that on to improve themselves, to find that potential, to maximize the performance?
What does that testing actually look like? Is that like a blood test? Is that
Well, it used to be a saliva, but now it's also different. Depends on what company actually use it. Some people do it with a swab, and then other people do it with just a blood drop. But it's actually super simple to get these things. And most companies, I mean, obviously there's a lot of companies today, but they mostly look into it in terms of establishing diagnosis. And also, we all know about, when we talk about DNA in terms of establishing a crime, for instance, a criminal, or fatherhood, what else could it be? Yeah, any kind of diseases. So it's not like it's uncommon or unknown for people to have heard about DNA. It's just, I feel like that is still not something we have been looking at in terms of optimizing performance. But obviously, I have hundreds of a really great result with that, working with individuals over the years.
How has it been for you to kind of put all this information into a book, but not also in a way that you guys that are done the research and everything understand, but in a way that, the people that are taking that information also understand how to use it, and it just comes across as a way that everyone can use it. You know what I mean? Because some of the words that you're going to use in there might be a little too difficult or far ahead for some of the athletes, because like I said, when you sent me chapter 1, I was like, well, are there more pictures in here? Like, can I get some more visual references or something so I can understand like where this is going and whatnot?
Yeah.
It's not that I didn't understand what you were saying. It's just that sometimes my mind goes all over the place. So I'm trying to think of a visual of like how to like actually implement these things that you're saying. So how has it been to kind of put that together, and how have you made it in a way that others can also understand?
Well, to begin with, to be honest, we actually didn't think that this book would be something most people would want to read. So we just put everything together, because obviously my research has been really collecting a lot, reading so many books that I cannot even follow up with that. So to begin with, we actually created this because we had a little bit of what can we say, a little bit of meetings with maybe some sexism, maybe some, people finding hard to understand it. Like, I'm Danish. What do I know? You're not a former professional football player. No, not really. And also, you're not a soccer player. So we had a little bit of experience with people doubting it. And, respectful of that. Of course, if you don't understand something, it's hard to actually understand that this is also something that I or me as a responsible, whatever that would be, for athletes, how can I actually use this? Isn't it just something going on in the lab? So that's actually part of why we created it in the first place. So it's more or less like a rough part of it. So we will actually make it a little bit more digestible for more people. But this was just to have a little bit of information so you can get an idea about what is it actually we need to understand in terms of performance, in terms of optimizing the individual. So I can give you a funny example about that as well, because when I try to describe why we need the information, I don't remember again if I mentioned that, but I always use the example. So let's say Nike, for instance, came to one of your teams. You were part of a team. Nike came in with 100 pairs of really brilliant shoes for playing, or boots. And then they said, here's a pair for every one of you. And it's just mixed sizes. So we just put it in the same size. Will that be a problem at the end of the day? This is the environment they put into. But yeah, there might be somebody two numbers too short, but yeah, I'm going to squeeze my foot in. I might get a little bit of bleedy blisters, but I'm just going to, suck it up and then just follow through. Or I'm going to put in a smaller foot to a bigger shoe, and then I'm just going to try to adjust it. So wouldn't it have been a little bit more efficient if we actually knew the size going forward, so we didn't have to adjust the environment for that? So when we look at the genetics, it's actually understanding, this is my blueprint. How can I create the environment so it matches my blueprint? That's actually the whole idea of understanding this. And actually, when you look at, especially in team sport, we have these silos. We put everything in silos, probably because it's mainly men, not to offend anybody, but men works in silos.
Exactly.
You laugh, you probably, yeah.
For real.
That's just how it is, So I always get asked, so in what department can we put you? And I'm like, actually, all of them and in between. And they just look at me like, that's not possible. Like, yeah, but you're missing
Well,
out on what's going on
you're
in the
messing up our
community.
categories. Like, we don't like that.
Exactly. That's the response I always get. Is like, but we don't understand it. So why does the mental department way back in the corner of the facility where we actually just knock on the door when we have an issue? Why does that all of a sudden have to speak to the physiotherapist or the nutritionist? Because it's everything communicates. And this is actually where people are missing out on so much information. So that's the reason why I thought, okay, maybe I need to put something together so they can kind of read it themselves instead of maybe they don't want to listen to me for hours. So that was part of my start process of why I wanted this. Obviously, the section 2 is going to be about the whole understanding of the connection with neurochemistry and the mental part of it as well. So you can look forward to that next part as well.
Is there going to be a section in there that talks about snooze? Because I mean, I saw what you posted on Instagram. I quit.
You probably lost some followers after.
Yeah, for sure.
Exactly. Nobody likes it.
It's been
That's
4
how it
weeks
is
now
to be
for
unpopular.
me. It's been 4 weeks for me now without snooze, right? So I quit ever since you posted that.
Really?
What does that do for the performance? And also, you're talking like Denmark, Sweden, and then even now majority of Europe, everybody's doing snooze. Especially from the athletic side of things. Like, I remember I would go to practice, I'd have one in. At the end of practice, I got one in. Pre-game, I got one in. Middle of the game, go ahead, let me get one. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What is it doing to athletes, and how is it harming them and affecting their performance?
Oh, it has so many consequences, and it's actually interesting that you even mentioned that, because I think it was quite before I did the post. There was something again in terms of the in the Premier League that it has become such a big issue. So of course, there's a lot of trying to get stimulants because we're tired, we're just burned out, we're exhausted, and then you also need to go in and train hard or even have a difficult, demanding game. Of course, you can understand that we seek these stimulants in some sense, but there's also it's also very addictive. So when you have this addictive to stimulants, then you also hijack the dopamine receptor. So that means you get a dopamine response when you have some snooze. It could be something else, which is a little bit hard when you're also an athlete, of course. But since it's snooze and it's addictive, you're releasing some dopamine. But obviously, the more dopamine you get, the more you need to do to get the same response. So the reaction kind of wears out. But what that happens is that it affects your sleep, because it's also stimulants and it's hard to actually wind down to get the rest so you have a proper sleep, which means your recovery is not going to be as good. And when you don't have that right sleep, your cortisol will rise, and then like the bad rabbit hole is actually just continuing on that. So that's a lot of consequences for the desired outcome we actually do want. And that being said, of course, there's a lot of things also in terms of nicotine and in releasing some of the acetylcholine in the brain, which gives you focus. So it also makes sense that you have a good experience with it. Obviously, like I said, the downside is the addiction part of it, because that creates something else. And then people have to get something to calm themselves down because they obviously want to have some sleep. So we're talking about the chemicals again, which is obviously controlling everything. It's controlling our behavior. It's controlling how well we perform, but also how well we balance things. So that's why understanding the chemicals on a neurochemical level is just so super important to increase.
Yeah, I never thought of it that way. Yeah,
that's probably is that your least liked photo on least liked post as of late?
Yeah,
I remember I saw that and I was like,
everybody was like, oh, yep, unfollow me. She talking crazy.
The only reason is because I've been in Europe for so long. I was just like, I know this won't hit well.
For sure.
But addiction is such a big problem in sport. I mean, I always get surprised how much addiction there really is, and that could be really bad lifestyle next to a really high performance that is very demanding, very exhausting, requires a lot of recovery. I have actually been very surprised how much addiction there really is, not just to snooze, unfortunately, but I see that a lot. But again, there's also so much pressure. So there's also another part of me, of course, I can understand why we sometimes seek something that can give us some pleasure. completely understandable in some sense, but obviously it has a really bad consequences.
Yeah, why do you think athletes suffer so much from having so many addictions? Because I mean, you look at like some of the highest performers in all sports do have those certain like, well, there's gambling addictions, right? There's
Mm-hmm.
drug addictions, there's alcohol addiction, right? There's addiction. Like there's so many things that people can
Yeah.
say that are they're addicted to. But if you look at like the high performance, like there's usually something that they're
Mhm.
that you could probably say is a negative or maybe even a positive
Yeah.
addiction. There's addiction things that we have. Is it just because we like
Yeah.
that's the one thing in our life that we can kind of control and like use that like a team isn't controlling for us? Like our schedules are so controlled by them, practice and
Yeah.
when we
Yeah.
lift and all that stuff. Like we like to say that we can control our addiction. Like we can like for me, I know like I can say, hey, I can put down snooze at any time. This 4 weeks has been fucking tough. Right?
I'm so proud of you. I'm
It's
really
been really
proud of
tough.
you because
But I was
that's
like, you know
really
what?
not that easy.
Yeah, and I was like, you know what? I still want to have my lower jaw when I get older, when for my daughter. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
So I had to think of
Exactly.
it that way to be able to put it down. But
Thank
it's
goodness.
still tough. So what is
Yeah.
it do you think that like plays a role into why athletes have such have addiction traits?
There's so many things. Like you said, you're so controlled, and obviously also for some people as well, that depending on what sport, of course, but some are actually really bored. So it's just like, I cannot even control the free time I have, or otherwise I have too much free time. So I'll get bored. So I need to have some high or some calm. But again, we actually in the bigger picture, we're actually back to the preventive part, because I don't feel like that most of the sport today, to be honest, the more I get into even the individuals, I'm just surprised how little they do on a preventive level, which means the mental health is not really as good as it could be. Which also means that when you push an athlete that much as you do, not just on a physical level, but also there's a lot of mental pressure. And you guys could probably relate to that as well. So everything is like, it gets too much, it gets overwhelming. I'm a little bit burned out. What can I do to kind of self-medicate myself in some sense? So at least I feel like I have a parallel way of finding pleasure. So I think there's a lot of things within that for sure that is triggering you, because again, a lot of athletes are not super motivated for going into the gym again and again and again and getting into that hard game, being super exhausted. It's not, I don't know about you when you both played, but a lot of them is not continuing motivated about what they're doing. They're just there because they're good at it, they make good money or whatever. So that's kind of their professional career, or even if it's not necessarily professional. But what I hear, at least from the athletes, is that there's a lot of things that they don't really necessarily every single day, like people would think, are just super happy or super fulfilled with their sport. So it's natural that we seek something that gives us some kind of satisfaction besides the sport.
One thing I wanted to mention last time, and I totally forgot. I totally forgot what it was and who it was that said it. But I'm not sure if you've ever heard of it. But it's like the five. I think it's either 5 or 4 coactives of sport, and it's
Mm-hmm.
by like Dr. Fergus Connolly, and I think it's
Mm-hmm.
like physical, psychological, technical, tactical, and the last one was like culture. And I feel like, especially like the higher levels, when you're talking about like the professional football, the guys with regards to technical and tactical, they have that. And then especially with regards to physical, they also have that. And that's why I feel like with your expertise and even what the book is speaking to is just like that psychological and cultural, I believe is so much more important and significant at those higher levels of the game, just because all those athletes already have, I mean, they're there for a reason,
Yeah.
technical, tactically, and physically, pretty much they're all on the same level. And the difference psychologically and the difference, culturally within that organization is in like paramount.
Mm. But let me ask you a question now that you mentioned the culture part. What do you think culture actually is? Because we actually had that dialogue yesterday, because it's super obsessed in the European football, soccer. And I feel like it's a little bit coming into American football as well in the US. It's like we talk about this culture all the time. And it's interesting because it's for me, becomes one of the cliches or the phrases we like to use, because that's probably some old McKinsey company organization thing. And now we want to bring it in. But I actually thought about, what is culture actually? Is it like we want to have a a good environment. We want to have, speak nicely to each other. We want to treat it. What is culture actually? Because in the core of the culture, there's still the individuals that needs to perform, which is the athletes. So what my perception, at least within that, the problem about what I see about the culture building is that it creates this top-down approach rather than having a bottom-up. And what I mean by that is that we put in a recipe we expect everybody to operate within. And let's just say, I don't know if you've heard I'm so bad at remembering name, but there was a guy that was a former rugby coach that was brought in creating this culture in some soccer team in England. And it was about having purpose, having something that the whole team could feel like they were fighting for or, performing for. And the problem with that is that some people like that bonding, like that togetherness, that they have a mutual goal that they want to fight for. But there will always be a percentage of that. I don't have the numbers for that, but I would say, like, my guess would be 30-40% doesn't necessarily get driven by that. So you will always lose somebody by having a recipe that you expect work from everybody. And that's what I see with the problem. Depending on, of course, what's the culture for me being here, part of this team. So we have a collective culture, but we also have an individual culture. And that individual culture is about how can I bring out the best from me with the genetic blueprint, because that's actually the foundation I'm built from. And what you two guys have on profile is probably not alike, and it's not like mine. So we're all different in terms of how we feel motivated, what the sense of purpose is turned on by, because we're back to the genetics and the neurochemicals. So whatever fuels us is individual. And that's how I see the problem with, again, putting things into silos and separating these as well.
No, yeah, the culture conversation is. I've had that conversation with a lot of people, especially over the years. I think the one thing that I've kind of ruled it down to is because the culture that I always try and have with my juniors here in the weight room is always just like, it's like a discipline thing. Like, we'll be disciplined, we'll always have effort, and then consistency. And then I usually try to get away from what I used to get in college, where it's like you put the words on the wall, and people just see it. So I've gotten away from that. So instead of like having it printed out on paper, our discipline is, they have sheets, you fill out your sheets every day, and there's consistency with that. We clean up the weight room before we leave. And it's just like, it's not something that we say, it's just something that we do every day. And then I've kind of realized, and the culture doesn't get carried out when they leave the weight room. So when we go to the field, the kids are allowed to be late to practice. So one thing that I've kind of realized is just from like a general aspect outside of like the individual is just like the culture needs to be enforced by the whole staff and or organization. And I think the biggest thing for building a great culture, which I actually heard from one of the coaches that was here prior, was your hiring process. If you hire the right people, you don't really have to worry about having a good or bad culture. If you have all the right people in that organization, you don't have to worry about, these are words for culture. You don't even have to have that meeting. It's just like everybody will be on the same page as to what it is that we're trying to build. But the individual side of it is definitely interesting.
But also when you think about the culture, because you probably know more than me in terms of let's just say the NFL, because that's probably what you know more about than me. But let's just say if you can think of a team right now, this season, who you feel like have a really good culture, and they might not even still not be performing super well. So what is it actually you want to build with that culture? You see what I'm saying? It's like, I like the idea that we want to have a culture. I think it's super good that we have something like a framework that we all work from. And then within that, this is kind of how we want you to be, or be with us as a culture within that. But it doesn't necessarily bring you more wins. That's more my point.
No, definitely. No. That's one thing too, is just like, and do you think that's just at the higher levels, where it's just like, once you get to those higher levels, like culture and performance no longer are, parallel to each other?
Yeah, exactly. And that's more my thing, because I think we need everything that is obviously important for a team on a collective basis. Of course, we need those, but we cannot look away from the reality that you still have a bunch of individuals it's just a fact, like we all have different shoe size, we all have different eye colors, we still have that 2% that is different. So as a human being, we are like, because we all have a heart, we have lungs and all that. Hopefully we have pretty much the same recipe in that. But 2% of every single human being has a variant. And that variant is my important information for how I perform the best. And that's actually the most important 2% that can enhance and improve my performance, maybe 10%. So even if you look at a team who has a collective team approach, we still need to focus on how do we build up the individual. Why are some players, for instance, more injured than others? They have the same training, they have the same protocols, they have everything the same, but yet some people tend to always have inflammation or whatever. So it could be that maybe we should also build that thing up together with the culture if we at least want to have a better performance, which obviously at the end of the day, most teams want to win. So I would imagine that's what we're all trying to get. And also not to make sure that we don't just, exhaust the players so much that they are actually not able to deliver the best.
Speaking of culture, what is your take on mental toughness? That's one thing that I battle with a lot, just with like coaching, where it's like I'm kind of like I was born during the time of like when I was getting coached. It was just like do what the coach says. If it hurts, keep pushing unless it's broke, right? And there's still a little bit of that in me, right? And that's the thing. I usually try and I always hold back. I feel like I do a good job, especially here in Europe, because obviously the kids aren't. They work in America. And then there's also the other side of me that's just like you have to adapt to these athletes. So it's like the waterfall approach, and then there's like the adapting part. But sometimes I feel like the con to the adapting part is now that I'm robbing this athlete of actually being able to adapt to the situation. Where it's just like, because for me, it's just like you may not always get a coach that's going to be nice to you and likes you. Right? Or just that's always on your side. So like that, I battle with myself on the whole waterfall approach and just being adapted to the athlete that you have in front of you. What is your take on that?
Well, first of all, I would say, because obviously I hear that a lot in sport, and especially in team sport, because nobody wants to kind of look like the weak part. But to be honest, I feel like that most athletes that have come this far, not necessarily being the top pro, but you still need to have some level of mental toughness to get that far, which requires a lot of grit, a lot of discipline and stuff. So, but the thing is that mental toughness, if we can call it that, is never static. And that's the biggest problem I see in sport, is that when coaches, they say, he's a mental strong guy that he can handle. But the thing is, again, we're back to the neurochemicals. We are born with a genetic set of blueprints, which is actually why you feel like some people feel like they're super mentally strong, but that's because they have a way of adapting due to genetics. So we are actually kind of born with a certain level of resilience genetically. That doesn't mean that we cannot level that up to an even better level. So let's say some guy actually struggled with mental issues easier than his teammate. So for me, for instance, when I look at that genetic profile on the cognitive level, I always look at, okay, but this specific person might actually be struggling with when he's under pressure, because I can only look at it from when you're under pressure. So when this individual are struggling under pressure, maybe to release enough dopamine, which means that will make you focus, that will enhance your decision making, that will make you driven and all these things that dopamine does. So when you're under pressure and you don't have enough dopamine, that's apparently an issue. So you might read that from the outside as a person that just, he freezes, or he melts down in the very high pressure. Let's just say a team, for instance, we've all seen that when they have setbacks and they're behind, all of a sudden they don't even know how to catch the ball or whatever. And that's because some of these athletes, they might already be having issues with having the right chemicals at the right giving time, which is actually something you can train them to. So just creating this awareness about, okay, we have an issue here, so maybe we can level this chemical up before the game, or we can help you become more focused. So that is your issue. You don't have all these mental errors, because that's another thing we hear a lot about when the coaches always say, oh, we had a lot of mental errors. And I always ask myself this question, okay, we established a lot of mental errors, but what are we going to do about it? It doesn't really help to just call them out. We need to go back and say, how can we prepare ourselves? So then we're back to the mental toughness, which means that it's about building your stamina, building your grit prior to the game, rather than actually just pushing yourself so you're so exhausted. And those chemicals also, which is another thing that's important to understand. Let's say we have an individual, which I actually do sometimes, who are very stressed. And we can be that during a season because there's a lot of pressure. We might not eat the right nutrition. And due to genetics, there might actually also be some food intolerances that will trigger that bad diet. And when we have that, you think that will work out because I'm training hard anyway. So it's not like a calorie thing. It's more to do with my body can really not tolerate these toxins. So what that happens with is actually that you're not capable of releasing right of the amount of neurochemicals that is required for your brain. So I always actually look at these things in categories. So when we talk about anything relating to sport that is categorized as mental, I look at 4 categories. There's the brain part. The brain is the organ we have, and that brain is requiring a lot of right nutrients. That means the fuels. And then we have the mind. The mind is everything in the software that you program with. So that means that you as a coach teaching a kid how to do this in specific situations, it's the belief system, is how we analyze the situation. And that's actually a part for itself, which is usually the part we refer to, I think, when we talk about the mental. And then the third one is the cognitive ability. So that means all these programs you put in the training and you expect the athletes to execute on in the performance. How well does he do that when it's actually required? So are they cognitive? Is he capable of making the right decisions under pressure? Can he handle that pressure? You know, all these things about thinking right in the given situation. And then there's the fourth category, which is the neurochemical. That means the dopamine, the serotonin, the cortisol, all these chemicals that we rely on because that actually controls the behavior. And then we go back to the brain again. So all these things, if you understand that everything is connected. So let's just start with the brain again, because let's say the brain is really not fueled with the right fuel for the individual. So that means you show up, you have trained really hard on the physical part, and then you get into the pressure point. Cortisol might be rising as well, which it should be. And then the dopamine will not really be released. And then you start to doubt yourself. And then that affects your cognitive ability. And then more chemicals are being released. So you see, like, there's so many different parts that we need to think about when we even discuss mental toughness. So for me, when I'm talking about mental toughness, I always look about how can we train the grit? How can we train the resilience? Is there anything, because at the end of the day, none of us can fight our chemicals. It's just like when I say, when people try to lose weight, nobody's backbone is stronger than a what's it called, like a spiking and a dropping blood sugar. We're just not. I don't know about you guys, but if I'm really like having low blood sugar, I'm gonna eat anything. I'm not going to, but I could even go to McDonald's. It's, you know, I mean, I could eat anything. That's how bad I don't want it. But it's like we cannot control these things because the chemicals is actually the thing we should look at when we talk about mental toughness. So the key to this and the secret of to understanding these chemicals, because we have them released on and off all the time, but the secret is actually that we can control them ourselves. And that's how I look at mental toughness. So yeah, we might be some people that have this, what can you call it? Like they're already by nature a little bit more resilient than other people might be. But also to understand that that's not necessarily consistent. That could be that something is going on in the private life, in the family or whatever. And then of course that will affect the chemicals in a level that strong toughness that used to have might be, you know, under the floor. So we might not even have that anymore. So for me, it's actually more about understanding what is going on in this situation. How can we make sure that these things are in balance? But first of all, we got to focus on your brain, because the brain is actually the headquarter for all this. So that's how I look at it. But that's why mental training, sorry?
No, go ahead.
No, I was about to say, so that's why the mental training and the proactive approach is much more efficient than always waiting for, oh shit, he collapsed, go into the corner of that department because there might be somebody putting out the fire. So I always think about that. We all have our brain is the biggest asset. I just, before you go on, Coop, I just want to ask both of you, how much of a football game, for instance, do you consider mental part? How many percentage of the sport is
Ooh.
mental?
For me, it's gotten lower as the game has, as I played this game, just because it happens just so easily for me, and it's kind of like that flow state.
Yeah.
And I think just like you said, I feel like I think one thing that was always innate to me, because people always ask me like how I like, but like stressful situations, I just handle stress well, and
You
that
don't
just
think it's
comes like
stressful?
yeah, no, not for me,
No.
no, and I think
No,
that's
no.
just an innate quality for me.
Yeah, absolutely. What
I
about
would
you,
say that.
Coop?
I would say pre-game is probably like prior to the game is probably more stressful than actually being in the game. Because I think there's a
Mm,
lot of things that lead up that you're thinking of that could happen in game and all the stuff that you prepared for and whatnot, and just running through plays and formations and calls and all that stuff. That part
mm,
probably is more mental than when you get in the game. Like it's kind of just like second nature. Like I don't really think that much when I'm in the game.
yeah.
No, yeah,
Obviously,
same.
being at the position that I was at, like safety slash linebacker, like yeah, we had to make like checks and stuff, and that
Mm.
plays a mental part in there. But outside of that, it became so like it's football at the end of the day.
But that's really the typical question here because, yeah, but of course, we have to make decisions like all the time. The interesting part of it is actually that because I always look at American football really as a chess on grass. I'm just so fascinated how much you have to memorize, how often during a game you have to make decisions, even in seconds. So I'm just so amazed that not only do you have to be physically super prepared for this, but you also get run over by a truck almost. That's at least how I see it because it just seems so brutal. But at the same time, your brain really have to be with you because you need to make decisions. You have to be strategic. All these things that are going on such a short time. So of course, what you have to expect is that your brain is with you. And just to share a little bit of example, because actually last week I did a workshop with the best tennis coaches we have in Denmark in one of the best tennis clubs. And I asked them the same question. So how much of tennis is actually mental? Immediately they said between 70 to 90%. I'm like, okay, that's quite a lot. Besides obviously everything that comes prior to that. And then obviously I said, so how much time do you put into that part of that preparation when the mental is so much of a percentage? And they're like, yeah, maybe 2%. And that's interesting for me because when you actually understand how important your brain's function is, which is not really about toughness, which is not about grit, it's more to understand that if you don't have a well functioning brain, then all this program you have put in, all these memories, because you guys have to memorize a lot in football, all these things, the cognitive ability might not really come out as good as you could do because you haven't actually trained that before a game. And that's actually the biggest part of what I think about in terms of the mental part, all the proactive approach to all these things. And then the
Never,
toughness would actually come with that, to be honest, because the more you experience that, what I always call the competence confidence loop, the more you deliberately seek the challenges, create a competence, create the confidence, and automatically you have in your nervous system, you have a memory of being mentally tough. So there's really a lot of ways to get to that level where the individual have a feeling. And also, if you actually ask a whole team, what is mental toughness for you? It's not necessarily the same thing. Again, we're back to it's not necessarily the same recipe. So what is mental toughness for me might be that, I'm not complaining about training, even though I'm in a lot of pain, or other people can be something different. But at least to create completely within that nervous system a memory or belief system about themselves in terms of how they look at themselves, then obviously that level of performance is mainly physical, but is created and generated by the mental. Because the mental speaks to the nervous system, which is our movement.
yeah, I never really think
What
about
did
how
you?
much goes into our game until you talk with somebody that doesn't like really know it as well as we do, right? Like we don't really we're like when I go to a football game and I'm watching the game and start talking behind me about like what they think is about to happen. I'm like, actually no, this like they're about to run the ball. It's gonna go this way because like if you look at the guard or the tackle, how they're leaning, and they're like, huh? Yeah, so like you never really know, like you never really understand like how much mental and how little, like you say, a chess game
No.
our sport is until you hear other people talk about it. But we've been it's like second nature
Mm.
for us. But my question for you was what our last guest had asked is that What were some of the biggest lessons you learned from the mistakes you made?
In my life?
Yeah.
But I have had a lot of mistakes. So depending on which one you're diving into, I mean, I cannot even be specific right now. Well, sometimes it has been about probably some of the same thing that a lot of people did. We need the mistakes, we need the failures for us to actually realize how much we are capable of, which is probably some of the biggest thing. Because and also, what do we determine as a mistake? Could it be life in general? Because we all have downfalls and hitting the wall in different areas. So, but I would say in general, accepting that any failure is always a learning lesson. And from having repeated, I won't actually call it mistakes. I would probably call it, what can you call it? Like, when I hit the wall and I was like, damn it, now I really have a really not fair lesson in this. But I think the biggest lesson that have really gotten me more capable of actually dealing with it going forward whenever they show up, because they usually do, is probably that I think I heard many years ago, I heard somebody say, what if you look at yourself as an intern in this, in this life you're giving, with whatever human being suit you were giving? What if you look at yourself as an intern and everything you feel like is really challenging? What if you actually got that served for you because you needed to develop and learn in that? I think that has been the biggest lesson for me, because then it's also not anymore about, oh, why is this happening to me, rather than actually, no, maybe I need to evolve in this thing and develop some skill in this life I am with, being this human being. So I think that's probably which is also what I, when I have athletes, whether they are injured, for instance, that could be at the given moment, they feel like this is the world against them, which I can completely understand. That's how you feel, because are my career over now? Is this my last chance? And what am I going to be doing afterwards? Because of course it's devastating to be in that situation. But it could be anything. And I always said, you will experience more than this in life. There will be a big challenge for sure. I mean, I'm old enough to know now. We never just get shown one. We probably get a bunch over the lifetime. So I feel like that the more we can kind of accept the fact that this is what I'm in right now, and take it as a learning, and what else good opportunity can I get out of this?
What is something you'd want us to ask our next guest?
Yeah, next guest, without knowing what that will be an expert in.
Without knowing who it is.
How much of what they are helping others with, which I would imagine they do, are they practicing with themselves?
I like that. I gotta ask myself that question.
Because that's another thing. Obviously, I ask myself this because, I have all these things that I feel like is the right way to do it, or whatever I suggest my clients with. But because that's why, obviously, I need to be my own product. So, I can't preach. I mean, I cannot, what's it called? If I'm not
Practice
preaching
what you preach.
Yeah, exactly. If I'm not practicing what I'm preaching, then obviously I don't feel authentic in what I'm delivering as well.
True.
I love it. And Dorthe, that is episode number 2. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Thank you for everything that you dropped. All the insiders on the new book coming out soon, right? For some of us that like pictures, there will be pictures in there, right? Guys, if you haven't already, quit the snooze, right? It's not good for you. Any other addictions you having a problem with, talk to Dorthe, because I just, one post was it for me. That's all I needed to see and be able to quit. So look at her page. Maybe she'll drop some other addiction things and you'll be able to stop yourself. But thank you.
Yeah,
thank you,
and actually, I actually want to just add to that. If you have anybody reaching out to you who actually would like to have a part of the first section, which is obviously the only one out yet, is the section about genetics, then feel free and actually share the online link that you have, because obviously I will create the part section 2, section 3, which is also going to be about flow. And you both talked a little bit about that, because obviously I'm also a flow practitioner. So getting into the zone, how you can train those things yourself is going to be the third part. And to tell you, like I wrote to you recently, Coop, was also that we are actually publishing a book for, let's say, a little bit more hands-on direct book that most people can find
everything too.
Yeah, I'm gonna make some nice graphs and all that. So it's that was the idea to begin with in the first place. So you might like that. So let's get back when we get to that as well. So I hope to be on here again anytime. So thank you
Looks
a
like
lot
there's
for
going to be a
bringing me
third
in.
one coming soon. Now, guys, also
Yeah.
remember, go over to Evol if you're looking to find any of the top tier branding and programming, expert advice, and community dedicated to your success. That's run by my boy, Coach Jay, and Coach Nick Pham. So go over and go over to Evol and check those boys out. And thank you, everybody. And we're out of here.
Thank you so much. Enjoy.
Thank you.